Hey guys, Xylon Blue 1 here. And this time around I watched Pathology. Picked it up at Big Lots. Mom saw it, thought I'd like it, so I bought it. Wasn't too bad. Let's see, it stars Milo Ventimiglia, Michael Weston, and according to the case, Alyssa Milano, but more on that later. And it's from the creators of Crank, which, see the second one, not the first one, but the second one, High Voltage, is very nice. But let's just get started, shall we? How it opens, it has like this found footage type deal it's got going on with, there's this medical team dicking around with some of the recently deceased. And the way that the eyes are glazed over on the corpses, you would think it was a zombie movie, but it's not. Sorry, before you might even think that that's what I'm reviewing. But what's kind of interesting is that they're mocking the orgasm scene from When Harry Met Sally. I think that's what it's called. It's the one where Megan... You all know what I'm talking about. And after that short little stint, they this is really cool. They have two slides and it fades into two parts of the Hippocratic Oath because it deals with medicine and stuff. And from there it goes to a scene of a bedroom with Alyssa Milano's character, whose name is Gwen, and Milo, whose name is Ted. And the first scene in the movie is a pseudo-sex scene. How about that to get your attention? And at this point, it's kind of revealed that Ted works in a morgue, and that he's got to go to work, so he's kind of reluctant. And oh, I love you, kiss me one more time, let me feel you up, do-do-do-do-do. You know, all that cutesy shit. And then he goes to work, and he must be new there because he's being shown around to the county morgue. And in the pathology room, there's a whole bunch of autopsies that are being done. And actually, with this movie, and it's a good place to interject this, there's plenty of gore in this movie, but the gore actually looks fairly realistic, which, then again, considering this was put out by like 20th Century Fox and Lakeshore Entertainment, you know, it's not a B movie. I mean, it might be classified as a B movie, maybe, I'm not sure, but it's one that, you know, isn't made by the Asylum or another low-budget company, so it actually has money to work with. Let's just look through my notes here and see what's next. And there's some classroom scene that I really didn't get where it talks about what pathology is, and it's like the horrors that happen to the human body, and then you backtrack to the original or something like that. I don't really know. And it's revealed that Ted had been to Africa and that he's engaged to Gwen. Don't remember how that conversation quite went. Oh well. And Ted meets some of the other pathologists in the morgue. And one of them is Dr. Oh crap, what was your first name? I always forget what your first name was. Dr. Jake, his name was Jake. Dr. Jake Gallo. And you know they did this intentionally and set him up to be a bad guy. Gallo, as in the gallows. And Ted shows his proficiency with pathology when this small medical team of med students, I think they're med students, I'm not quite sure, is all gathered around a body, and Ted nails the diagnosis on what happened to this person. Then a little bit after that, he's harassed by another one of the residents there, whose name was Griff. Yeah, his name was Griff. And a little while after that, I rely on my notes again. I don't know, because this movie actually was pretty interesting to watch, so I actually had some hard time writing down notes, but I tried. And then they go to another body. This guy's name was Carl. But then the body starts to have post-mortem shakes, and Ted, in a lightning-fast move, like, tips the guy's head up, takes the scalpel, jams it in the brain to sever a nerve to make him stop moving, and then backs off. And there's this head doctor guy, I think his name was Dr. Morris, I don't quite remember, who was very impressed by this. And then I don't remember how they got to a conversation between Ted and Gallows, Gallows, whatever. I call them Gallows throughout everything. He said how he hates the living because of how society is or something. It was really metaphorical and quite interesting to listen to. I just don't remember any of it. And that he prefers the company of the dead because they don't have those problems, which pretty much sets up the fact that he's that calm kind of bad guy. Sure, he's got sociopathic tendencies, but whatever. He's the antagonist. He's supposed to. And after their shift, the Gallo and Griff and Ted and these couple other characters whose names I didn't really pay attention to go to this bar called 13 Stones. And they have a toast to the dead. That was pretty interesting. I know that there was one guy whose name I never really caught, who never really said anything. There was this redhead named Juliet who becomes important, but I'll get to her in a minute. And then there's this Asian chick whose name I still don't remember. And apparently her job was to make out with Juliet. Whatever. And they go to play a game, you know, a metaphorical game, of if you could kill anyone, who would it be? And why? And they go around, and then Ted says that you don't need a reason why if it's killing anybody for the sake of killing them. And then, I think it's later that night, or something like that, Gallo takes Ted to this house, where he comes across a prostitute. And then there's this really funky, drugged up scene where Ted, like, passes out or something like that. And then, a guy that was at the door of this place with a prostitute shows up in the autopsy room the next day. And, like what they do in the autopsy room, they're wondering what happened to this guy, and Ted fancies a guess. And what's really cool throughout this movie, dialogue-wise, is that they use lots of medical jargon, which seems confusing, but isn't really all that much. And anyway, a few minutes later, Ted and Gallows meet again, but this time they're in the hospital basement in an old autopsy room, and the dead door guy's there. And Gallows reveals the game again of you have to determine the cause of death, and he reveals that the prostitute, who he slept with by the way, was the door guy's grandmother. And then the rest of the resident group that was hanging out with them at the bar joins in the basement. And Gallows reveals that Ted has to play because he has evidence that he could plant at the scene that put Ted there. And for the second round of the game, as they kept calling it throughout the film, Ted had to kill somebody. But what he did is he went for some asshole who had attempted suicide and killed his wife and son, but was still alive. But before he goes to kill this person, there's some scene where he's on a bus at night. There's a woman who has a heart attack. And to convince himself that he can kill, Ted leaves, even though people are on the bus going, "Is there anybody a doctor here?" And Ted obviously is. And after he kills this lovely person who killed his wife and son, there's a scene where Gallows says to him that killing makes you feel new. Like reinvigorated or some shit like that. And it shows that before they do the autopsy, in the basement of this hidden room with the game, they all get drugged up on crack. That was sharp objects, crack. How can this be a good idea? But nothing ever comes directly out of that. And Juliet uses a bit of deception here for round 3, because Ted and the audience are led to believe that, and you know, my reviews have spoilers throughout. For this third round, there is somebody who you're led to believe is Juliet's father, and that he molested her. And it's really interesting how they did this, because Juliet and Ted kill him, and then they fuck right after. There's lots of shots of Ted's ass here and in the next scene. But later, when talking to Gallows, he reveals to Ted that it wasn't Juliet's father, that she lied to him and manipulated him, and then Juliet was like, anyone at all. And then the next scene shows different rounds of the game where they're guessing autopsies and how they died. And between shots of that, it shows Ted and Juliet fucking. Again. And then there's this interesting scene where Dr. Morris meets Ted for lunch, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but Dr. Morris just knew that Ted had been smoking crack and was using, as he put it. And then there's this other resident who's in there who gets harassed, whose name I didn't really notice or pay attention to until the end of the movie, but I'll get to that later. And then it shows Ted and Juliet fucking again. And then what's really interesting is after this, Ted goes to visit Gwen's family, and they talk about the engagement and whatever. And there's a really interesting, kind of horrendous scene. It's like a dual sex scene. It shows Gwen and Ted being all passionate, and then it shows Jake and Juliet on like a roof of a building doing like S&M stuff with needles and punching him and razor blades. I don't know. And at this point I noticed that I came to the realization of the only reason why they put Alyssa Milano on the cover was to get attention to the movie, because really her role in the movie is kind of small. Like, it doesn't really have that much significance on the plot. Well, after the climax it does. But really, she's just kind of there. And Gwen has a surprise for Ted that she's coming back to the city because they didn't live together. Which, of course, because of the game and Juliet, Ted gets all freaked out and nervous about it. But when they get... Oh, and when they get back, Gwen discovers a crack pipe, and Ted says that he's holding it for someone, with the oldest excuse in the book. But then... Ted and Gwen go to this party where they run into Jake and Juliet. And there's some weird scene where they talk about how he killed people. But they're talking about the autopsies. Or they let the party guests believe they're talking about autopsies when Gallows is really talking about the game. I don't know, it was weird. And then Gallows calls Ted after the party. And Ted goes down there, and there's lots of these dead hookers, and they were done with brutal, bloody kills. And Jake pretty much goes psycho here, and you can see that he's definitely off his lid and should be on meds. And then, I don't remember how we get there, but Ted goes home, and then Juliet comes to see Ted, dropped off by, like, Jake. And Juliet blows him, and Gallows saw this. What was interesting about the blowjob is Ted went home to see Gwen, who was upstairs. He got blown while he was waiting for the elevator. He's a swell guy. But then it shows how the group, except for Ted, meets at the dungeon, as they called it. Major spoiler alert! Okay? Major spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. And the body on the table this time turned out to be Juliet, and I'm pretty sure that Griff killed her by how he acts about it. But then there's a gas leak, but they don't see because there's sabotage here. And then when one of them goes to light the crack pipe, boom, explosion. But then Ted survives, and he goes after Gwen, and of course he kills her. And then after that, it shows Ted performing an autopsy on Gwen. Yeah, the first time you actually get to see Alyssa Milano's breasts, it's on a corpse. Even in a special feature on here, she says that her breasts are nice, and me and my girlfriend both agree. Anyway, moving on. And it's really interesting because at one point during the autopsy he holds her heart. I think there's a metaphor like he has her heart, but it wound up being more literal than, whatever. What was interesting is then Gallows comes back and starts beating up Ted. But Ted teams up with the other resident who was picked on that I mentioned a while ago. Even you don't quite see it coming, you just saw that he was picked on a few times, but then I don't know how Ted teamed up with this guy to dispatch of Gallows. But what's funny is that they even turned Gwen's death into the game as the final round of the game because Ted thinks he's won. Gallo thinks he's won. But what's really interesting is that as Ted's describing what Gallows really did to him, that picked on guy comes behind him with the chloroform cloth and knocks him out and does the thing to him. But then the most gruesome ending, my girlfriend hated this ending, but I thought it was really awesome, was they used, I don't know if it was chloroform, but it was some drug that would knock you out, but just before he goes unconscious, he's just immobilized. Then Ted performs an autopsy on him, and you see the blood as, it's not like dead body blood, it's, he's still alive. And then, cool ending line, I insert the clip here, but the last time I tried putting a clip in, it failed miserably. The last line before the credits roll is, I wrote it down, "Let's have a look inside," which was, I thought was pretty cool. And overall with Pathology, the acting was pretty top-notch, and they really captured the drama for what they were trying to go. I mean, I'm not, of the main characters, I don't think any of them were really underdeveloped, because Michael Weston, who was the one who played Gallows, he was right on with the having that dark kind of sinister character. I don't even know how to describe it exactly. It's where he's so evil, but he's so calm about it. That it's that kind of evil, I guess. But the tone of this movie is it's gritty. It's got that kind of horror to it. It's a thriller. I mean, yeah, the movie shot kind of dark, but number one with all the special effects, because I watched that little featurette of when it showed the effects for the bodies when they're fully lit. Like if they were in this room, you wouldn't be able to see it, but if it was dark, like I'm gonna forget it. But if it was dark, it actually helps you feel the tension and the horror. But actually, what's interesting about this whole thing is between the medical jargon and the autopsies and whatever, it felt a lot like the show Dexter, but much more violent and without the serial killer who kills serial killers. Anyway, and like I said about the dialogue before I said how they use a lot of the medical jargon, which I think is really cool. It gave it authenticity like it really was in a morgue. And there's a lot of metaphors used by different characters throughout the movie, and because of how they speak, you really feel for what the characters are feeling, at least for Ted and Gallows. The other ones that I didn't really pay attention to, but you don't really need to. And the effects were kind of similar looking for the bodies to The Walking Dead. I don't know if there's anybody from this team who worked with AMC for that, but it was very nice. And if I really had to give a review for this, I mean, of course I'm doing a review, that's what I'm doing right now. If I had to give it a rating out of 10, this one gets an 8 out of 10. I mean, there's some stuff that it can improve upon. Of course, I can't think of anything to say about. I'm left wanting more. I wanted to see him make him suffer for killing Gwen. I don't know, maybe I'm just a sick fuck. But, I'm Xylon Blue 1, and that's my review.